Let's have a chat about modelling. Modelling is so central to the scientific process. It's that essential step in so many sciences. So what's science about? It's about trying to understand the world and the universe in which we live, and that is of merit in and of itself, But a lot of understanding that is so that we can make things better. So if we think about climate models, we build a model of the climate so we can better understand how the Earth's climate works. Once we get a really good model, and our climate models have come along a long way in the last few decades, they're very, very good, we can then start to run some scenarios in that model that we couldn't do in the real world. We can speed up time by 50, 100 years. We can do things that we wouldn't dream of doing in the real world in our model and see what the outcome might be. In some ways, models are like scientific crystal balls. They let us understand what might happen under certain circumstances if we change things. So this scientist has set on a project to build a model to understand how these invasive plants spread through a national park. I'm going to guess that they're probably their outcome is to try and work out how can we reduce the spread of these weeds through our national parks. We want to keep our national parks in their kind of natural Australian state and not have all these other invasive plants through them. But they haven't quite got there yet. They've noticed that their model isn't really reflecting reality, and so that's quite a process for science to go through. Scientists will get more data and they'll try and refine their model and they'll try and make it better. Of course, models in science, start very, very simple. Ohm's law, in a sense, is a model of what's happening in an electric circuit. It lets us make predictions. It's really simple. It's got 3 variables in it, right up to climate models that have literally millions of variables in them, a very complicated model. So no problem with having too many variables and needing to simplify it. That wouldn't be the answer. And absolutely, digital technology is where most of our scientific models reside these days because they're really complex, and so they require complex computers to kind of do all the modeling and do all the calculations behind that model. Word on peer reviews. A very important part of science, but the peer review comes in when scientists have done some research and they've got something they think they're ready to share with the rest of the world and the scientific community. Before they get to that threshold of being able to share it, they will go through a process of peer review. So they want to publish in a certain journal. The journal will allocate their article anonymously to a bunch of other experts in that field. That's what's meant by peers. And those peers will look at that research and pull it to pieces. I know I've been on both sides of that fence and receiving a peer review. They want to look under every stone. They want to see your data and evidence for everything. It's a really good part of it. It's not perfect. No system is perfect, but it's a great way of making sure that science is being tested before it gets published, but not relevant to the model here. So scientists want to go and gather more data. Once you know your model's not quite ready yet, if it doesn't actually reflect reality, and a lot of what we do is we build our model and then we give it this kind of data set here and we get it to predict what might happen in the future. We do that with climate models. We give them data from decades ago and we get it to predict the next decade. Well, we know what happens in the real world, and so it's a way of testing our model to make it fit the data better and be a better predictor of it. So this scientist has noticed that, and so they go looking for data and they kind of notice, oh right, there's this thing about the real world that's not reflected in my model. Quick little note about plausibility. Plausibility doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct, it just means that it's the most believable. And in science, we've got this thing called Occam's razor, sometimes called the appeal to the simplest explanation. So Occam's razor is, we're going to choose, if we've got competing explanations for something, we're going to choose the explanation that requires the fewest number of things we've got to invent, the fewest number of steps between cause and the effect. If there's the fewest things we've got to have there, then we're going to go with that answer. That's the most plausible explanation. So we have a look at some of these explanations. Well, first of all, B is not even an explanation at all. It's a statement that says that you're probably wrong about your observation. Well, probably not. We've measured this. We've seen that observation happen. And of the other ones that are explanations, the one that requires the least amount of invention. Well, let's look at A, right? Plants prefer to live near walking paths. So they've got a brain and they've got emotions and preferences. Well, okay, so if you don't mean prefer in that sense, then really just mean they grow there. Well, that's just restating the observation. That's actually not an explanation at all. You haven't suggested anything, unless, of course, you're trying to invent a whole, brain system in plants so they can, have emotions and express a preference. And even if they did have a preference, how do they get there without kind of legs? The most likely, the most plausible explanation is that humans carry the seeds or bits of the plant that can grow vegetatively as they move down the tracks. So models, they're a beautiful, wonderful, central part of that scientific process that gives us the power that we have of understanding nature, and what we choose to do with that power, with that knowledge, well, that's where our humanity comes in.